Wednesday War College, Jesse Romero, Dr. Dan Schneider. Got a great show today. Hey, Dan, can you hear me? Just want to make sure you're 10-1.
I can hear you. We're broken
All
in
right.
today, as we say in the Army. You're coming in broken and stupid, so it's hard to tell. We'll see.
Dan, modernism has affected every single part of the church. One area that I thought it would never affect would be the area of spiritual warfare, healing, deliverance, exorcism. I thought that was something that was sacrosanct, but no, modernism has infiltrated even that area. Today we want to talk about Father Ripperger's book, Dominion. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's from Census Trad Press, and he's got another book for clergy. It's a little bit larger. It's called Diabolical Influence. However, there are other books, competing books in other competing systems. We're going to put two videos on right now. We're going to comment on them. They're very short videos. The first videos we're going to put on is a video put on Instagram by Jordan Burke. He works for CatholicSpiritualDirection.com. He works for his parents, Dan Burke and Stephanie Burke. Dan's a friend of mine. And he put out a post basically warning people not to read Father Ripperger's book, Dominion. I don't know where that came from, so we're going to just jump and probe into it. And then we're going to put another short video with Dan Burke, Stephanie Burke, and Monsignor Rossetti actually talking about the book Dominion and making some actual positive comments about this book as a resource. And then we'll get Dan's feedback on this book since he's writing a corollary to this book. So, Mr. Engineer, can you play the first video?
Should people be cautious when reading Dominion? What is Dominion? Dominion is a textbook by Father Chad Ripperger on diabolic oppression, obsession, authority, influence, all those sorts of things. And the question is, should people be cautious? The answer is yes. And I would even go further. And the expert that I spoke to before answering this question, would say that most people do not need to read this book. I'll say it again. Most people do not need to read this book. Why is that? Well, we're bouncing thoughts back and forth. This expert is someone who has worked in exorcisms, worked in deliverance ministry, written many books on the topic, and they affirmed kind of what I was going to say, but even with more intensity than I was initially going to bring to answer this question. And they said, quote, "For those who do not have a healthy spiritual life, if they read something like this and any other book on demonology, things of that nature, they're simply reading about their own demise," end quote. Meaning, you have certain things that you need to take care of first. Your relationship with God, your vocation, these sorts of things. What is the pathway for you to get to heaven? If this book is not on that pathway, you don't need to read it. It just becomes a distraction. My recommendation to people is that if you are thinking about reading a book like this, have a conversation with your spiritual director first and listen to whatever they tell you. And my guess is going to be they're going to tell you no.
That short clip from on Instagram was by Jordan Burke. He's the son of Dan Burke from the Avila Institute. Dan's a friend of mine. I've had him on my shows before. I don't know his son Jordan. I know he's a former Birmingham, Alabama police officer. Now works for his father, his mom and dad, for spiritualdirection.com and the Avila Institute. I think he runs their media section. And I want to put another short video of Dan and Stephanie Burke interviewing Monsignor Rossetti, and then we'll do a deep dive into the book Dominion. Mr. Engineer, can you play that clip?
Well, I want to start our time together with a question that Jordan actually has. There's a new book out.
This is Dan Burke.
I think probably the most comprehensive treatment of exorcism angelology that's ever been published. And Jordan asked, is there a proper disposition as you approach studying these things? Like, can it be curiositas or kind of a dangerous journey into studying these things if you're not, let's say in a state of grace, or if you're struggling still with habitual mortal sin? Is this something you ought to be studying and buying these books and that sort of thing? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Monsignor Rossetti.
I've seen some recent books, and I think I know the book you're talking about, which is a wonderful resource. There's two extremes. One is to say Satan doesn't exist, and sadly, there are even some, fortunately, people, leadership in the church who don't believe that. So that's sad, which is just not true. It's de fide. The other is too much interest in this sort of stuff, especially curiosity. There's a good curiosity about trying to understand the truth, and there's a bad curiosity, which is feeding a form of pride. And I do find sometimes there are people who become these self-styled experts on this subject and may not be in a state of grace. It's a very dangerous situation. So we should be informed. I like what both Stephanie and Dan, you're doing in this field. I think you're called to it, and you're just very good at it. And so you can see a grace working through you. Terrific. And you too should be reading. You should be informed. But when it crosses the line, it becomes this excessive curiosity, then it's not good.
That's it. That was Dan Burke, Stephanie Burke interviewing Monsignor Rossetti. So, Dan, we're talking about this book, Dominion. It's a book written by Father Chad Ripperger, who's basically been teaching us for several years. I know you're actually on Father Ripperger's team, and so, Dan, you're a biblical scholar, and you've been part of an exorcism team for many years. Monsignor Rossetti called the book Dominion a wonderful resource. And he said that Dan and his wife should be reading this book because they're at a level where they need to know be aware of these things. But it's not for everybody else. Somebody who's in mortal sin obviously shouldn't be reading this book. What would you say about this book, Dominion, Dan? Because you are deeply aware of the contents of this book because you've been pouring through it for years at this point.
Yeah, I think number one, a rule that I have is that never recommend a book that I haven't read, and never not recommend a book that I haven't read. So I think reading the book would be very helpful for those who are saying that we shouldn't read the book. And I think it's quite the recommendation to me is unfair because it doesn't. Again, if you've read the book, you realize this is not a book that would feed someone's curiosity. If anything, this is a book that will teach you the rules of engagement of spiritual combat. Father Ripperger has been approached by various publishers to do a Father Amorth or Father Fortea style book. These are the types of books that I think are very, very should have a disclaimer for people not to read these books that go into great detail about the diabolic. In our system, the demon is tertiary. In Catholic liberation. The first focus is on Christ. The second focus is on obstacles that keep us, all the obeses to grace that keep us from united with Christ. And then finally, what is the demon doing? And there's nothing in this book that is all sensational or talking about prayer sessions or things that Father has seen or anyone on his team has seen. This is actually an excellent resource, as Monsignor Rossetti says. This is a wonderful resource in his words, particularly for those that are engaging in spiritual combat. But to say that this would feed curiosity, I don't think that's a valid argument for someone. If you've read this book, you realize that this is actually the only criticism of the book. It's so big and it's dense and it takes time to work through. This is not a sit down and with a cup of hot coffee or cocoa and cuddle up in your book nook. This is roll up your sleeves, get on your knees and get to work and learn about the principles of the Catholic faith, good theology, as you say, DDT, devil defeating theology. So we need to know this. This is one of those manuals that really, really is helpful for individuals. So I think I would recommend all those to read that, whether you're in spiritual combat or not. Because the reality is we're all in spiritual combat, right, Jess? I mean, the Catechism says as such that since the beginning of history, we're engaged in dour combat. So various people at various levels and various levels of engagement, various levels of affliction, various levels of involvement in the apostolate. But this is a great resource.
Dan, I don't know why Jordan Burke, who works for his mom and dad, and they have a good reputation, I don't know why he would have come out on Instagram. And it seems to me that he did this of his own accord. He went out there and told people, hey, I'm going to quote it because I transcribed his notes. It says, and the expert that I spoke to before answering this question would say that most people do not need to read this book. I'll say it again. Most people do not need to read this book. This
Yeah.
expert is someone who has worked in exorcisms, worked in deliverance ministry, written many books on the topic. It would have been nice. I mean, if you're gonna, when I used to go to court and testify as a cop, when you invoke an expert, you better name your source. You can't be vague about your expert. You're going to have to say, Dr. So-and-so from Johns Hopkins University said this, page 219. That's the way you testify in a court of law. If you're going to tell somebody
Yeah.
to read a book,
Yeah.
you're not going to be vague about your footnote.
Well, and if it's just curiosity and citing what his expert, whoever that was, is saying, I think Father Rossetti's books, Dan Burke's books, any other books on spiritual warfare should be avoided and only read under the direction of your pastor, spiritual director, which we know is not practical.
Yeah, you're right, because all of them could lead to curiosity. We'll be right back.